Hey YouTube, hey viewers, and welcome back to yet another episode of creating our social media API using Laravel. We're getting quite far into the series. We've managed to register users, we've managed to log in the user, and in today's session we're going to look at how do we improve our collection of routes that we got going. So at the moment we're just doing line by line of route, but we want to make it a little bit more cleaner, so when we use Postman, for example, we know specific URLs to use. So we're going to look at that in today's session, and we're going to look at also getting our user pretty much not logged in, but the user will be logged in. We have a credential, and how do we access stuff from that user. So that's going to be in today's session, and hopefully you'll be able to follow along quite nicely. So let's go into our program. And what we're going to do is we're not going to look at the auth controller just yet. We're actually going to look at our API.php. And we can see that we've got these two routes here. We're going to be making another route today, and that's going to be able to get the user. So we obviously logging in, but we also going to need a route. So when we log in, remember we've got like that massive token. We need to be able to use that so we can control whether that user can use different parts of the website or not. So to do that, we need to kind of do what's happening up here. So notice there's this middleware in here. We're going to do something very similar, but we're going to make our own custom version. And it's dead easy to do. So what we're going to do first is we're going to make a route, and we're going to call this route group. And basically this is saying we're going to group all our routes under something. And again, this is going to be inside an array. And what we're going to do is we need to attach a few parameters to this group. The first one is going to be middleware. Now, the first bit of middleware we're going to be using is going to be specific to Laravel, and that is going to be called API. Now, remember when we looked in that config, remember that auth config, we saw that API. That's what we're tapping into. And then we're also going to add something called a prefix. Now, prefixes are quite cool because prefixes allow us to add names onto the end of our URL. So instead of just API login, for example, we might want to have something called users. So we'll have /API, /users, /login. And that makes things just a little bit more cleaner. That's our group pretty much set up. What we need to do is now, just after our array here, we need to pass in a few more parameters, and we're actually going to call a function here. So function. And we're just going to do our curly braces. And then we're just going to curl like that. Just put a semicolon at the end of here so it doesn't keep shouting at us. So we've got our route. Now it's part of a group. We're going to be using this middleware initially, just using the API middleware that we've got with our application, so in the app. And then our prefix that we're using is users. So anything that we're doing with our API will always wrap it inside this middleware here, because we're using an API. If we're using web, obviously you wrap it in web, but we're not, we're using API. And the prefix we're going to be using is users. So inside this function, we need to just add our routes. So we can actually copy this and paste it in here. And now we can actually delete these. So basically we're saying we need to have /users to get into this route group. And then we need to have /register at the end of this. So let's see if this works. So let's go into Postman, and I'm just on my normal Laravel.test. This is the current URL that we're using, which is this API /login. Let me try and log in here. Let's see what happens. Might take a few moments. So we can see it's not working now because it's saying it doesn't know what this route actually means. And we can always check, because if we go into the console, and remember I showed you that we have this PHP artisan route list. So if we run that, we should be able to get a list of our routes. As you can see here, we have some passport stuff. But now for our login, we've got this API /users /login. The same again for users and register. So we need to make sure that we put this users first. So inside our logic, so API /users /login. Hit the send, and we now have our response that we made in the previous session. Now it's going to be very important because we're going to need this, so make sure you do log in and you have access to this token because we're going to need it. However, I did tell you that we will be creating a new route in this episode, and that's going to be able to get the user. So we're going to get his information. So just this bit of information, but we're going to be using this token to retrieve it. Now to do that, we need to make sure that one, the user is authenticated, so he has logged in and he has got a token, and we need to check against that. And for that, we need to make sure we make another group just for specific information, so middleware, to check that the user is using an authenticated token. And again, this is dead simple. We just write the same type of logic as before. Route, group. So we're going to wrap this into a group again with our array. We're going to pass into that group, yes, you've guessed it, middleware, like so. Because don't forget, we're all still wrapping this under users. We don't need a prefix this time, but we do need some middleware. Initially, this is just looking at API middleware, but now we want to look at auth as well. Now remember, the auth was looking at the users table, and we're also going to be using the API middleware. Pretty straightforward, right? We don't need to put a prefix. I mean, you could if you want, but we don't specifically need it for this tutorial. But we're going to then put a function in between here, open and close brackets, open and close our curlies, enter space. And remember just to put a semicolon at the end. And inside this route is where we're going to control everything that needs to have a token. So this token. So let's say, for example, I log in, my name is Bob, and Bob wants to look at someone's profile. You need to make sure that that person is the right person that's logged in. You can't just have a random person just on the internet just going onto that profile. So we need to manage that. So let's make a new route. We can just copy this one if we want. It's probably a lot more easier. So we're going to use this route, and we're going to not use post. We're actually going to use get. And what we're going to do is we're just going to get the user. Actually, we'll just call it me. So we're just going to get me. And we'll just use the endpoint or function name called me. And basically, we need to make sure for this to work, and you'll see in a second, I'll show you two examples. To get to this controller with this function, with this route name, we need to make sure that that user is authenticated. Otherwise, it's not going to work. Obviously, we need to make some logic. So let's jump into our auth controller and let's make a new function. So public function me, open close brackets, curly braces. Okay. And the nice thing about this now is, remember we had that auth thing that we used with the login. So remember, instead of login, we had this user equals auth user. We're going to do exactly the same thing. So returning back to our auth controller, here we can just say $user equals auth user. Close that off. And we're just going to return a response back. So let's just copy this. Again, remember in the next episode, we're going to turn these into helpers, so we don't have to keep copying and pasting all this time. It'll make it a lot more simpler. Just get rid of all this rubbish. We don't need this, and we can just pass back the user. And this is just going to give us all the details about the user. So let's see this in action. Let's go onto our Postman, go into YouTube, and we're going to just duplicate this. This is going to be a GET request. It's not going to /login. It's actually going to be going to /users /me. And it's a GET request. We don't need anything in the body, so we can get rid of everything inside the body. Headers, we make sure that they store the application JSON. And params, we can actually delete these, so just make sure it's nice and clean. So really all we're doing is just a GET request to this endpoint, and that's it. So if we hit send, notice we get this message saying we unauthenticate, or unauthenticate. I can't say that word, it's terrible. But basically, this is saying that the user that's trying to get to this endpoint is not allowed to, because we're not passing anything to the endpoint with anything saying that this user should be allowed to. Now remember, when we did that login, it gave us this bearer token here. Now this bearer token is going to control all our user information within inside this token. So this is very valuable, this token, because this is what they use to kind of verify the user wherever you go. So we're just going to copy this, this token. So make sure you do it inside the quotation. So you want to copy all that. And inside our, I'll change this actually. It's not called login now. We'll just call get me. And inside the authorization, the type we want to choose is going to be a bearer token. You can pass it through the header too if you like. It's just a bit messy for me. But inside the authorization, it's a little bit more easier. And I'm going to choose the bearer token. And I'm going to paste in my key into this token area. Save. Okay. And send. And now you notice I don't get this unauthorized message. I am now authorized to look at anything in regards to my user. Because in our logic, we've said in here, if we hit this endpoint, we want to see our user. And we're just going to return back our response of that user. This has been a dead easy session. I just want to inform you as well that from now on, I've set up a Git repository, which you can have a look in the description below. I'll add it into this video. Basically, there'll be branches for each one of the future lessons. So this one will be lesson 11. I'll be pushing all the new changes there. So if you do get confused, just switch on to the new branch and you can see all the changes that we currently did with inside that video. Don't forget, if you really enjoyed this session, I mean, remember it was dead easy. All we did is we just added in this new route group, which is pretty cool because we can control things by giving it a prefix. And now we can be very specific on they need to have this middleware. So they have to be authenticated before they can touch this route. And then all we did on top of that was just added in this little bit of logic here, which just returned back a user. So hopefully you really enjoyed that. If you did enjoy it, don't forget, make sure you hit that like button. If you really liked it, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We've also got this join button if you want to check that out too. Don't forget, we've got a Discord where I'm active and I am helping people if they need it as much as I can. And don't forget, there is a Twitter too. Again, hopefully you enjoyed that, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Goodbye.